Last Tuesday, I discovered my husband of 7 years was having an affair in the most bizarre way possible. His affair partner accidentally sent me screenshots of their steamy text conversations, thinking she was sending them to her best friend who apparently knew all about their relationship. The screenshots included messages about how much they loved each other, details about their secret dates, and even discussions about my husband leaving me. I'm still in shock that someone could be so careless with evidence of destroying a marriage. I'm 32F, and my husband Mark is 35M. We've been married for 7 years and together for 10. Until last week, I thought we had a solid marriage. We bought a house together 3 years ago, have 2 kids aged 5 and 3, and I genuinely believed Mark was committed to our family. Mark works in sales for a marketing company and has always had a job that requires him to travel occasionally and work irregular hours. I work part-time as a graphic designer from home, so I can be with the kids more. We've always been good at balancing work and family responsibilities, and Mark has always been an involved father and attentive husband. But about 6 months ago, Mark started acting differently. Nothing dramatic at first, just small changes in his routine and behavior that I initially attributed to work stress. He started staying late at the office more frequently, claiming he had important client meetings or deadlines. He'd come home exhausted and distracted, often going straight to his phone instead of spending time with me and the kids like he used to. Mark also became much more protective of his phone. He started taking it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom, and would flip it face down whenever he was around me. When I asked about it casually, he said he'd been getting a lot of work calls and didn't want to be disturbed during family time. His travel schedule also increased significantly. Mark started taking overnight business trips that he'd never mentioned needing before. When I asked about the sudden increase in travel, he said his company was expanding into new markets and he was being given more responsibility. Around the same time, Mark started paying more attention to his appearance. He bought new clothes, started going to the gym regularly, and even got a new haircut. When I complimented him on looking good, he said he wanted to make a better impression with clients and that his company encouraged employees to maintain a professional image. Mark also became more critical of our relationship and family life. He started making comments about how boring our routine had become and how he felt like we were just roommates going through the motions. He'd suggest that we needed to spice things up or that maybe we should consider couples counseling. At the time, I thought maybe Mark was going through some kind of midlife crisis or work burnout. I suggested we plan a weekend getaway without the kids, but Mark said he was too busy with work to take time off. I also noticed that Mark had become much more secretive about his social media and email. He'd changed all his passwords and would quickly close his laptop whenever I walked into the room. When I mentioned it, he said he'd had some security issues at work and had been advised to be more careful about digital privacy. About 3 months ago, Mark started working late on weekends too. He'd say he had urgent projects or client emergencies that couldn't wait until Monday. This was unusual because Mark had always been strict about keeping weekends free for family time. Our physical relationship also changed dramatically. Mark became distant and seemed uninterested in intimacy. When I tried to initiate conversations about it, he'd say he was stressed about work and needed some space to focus on his career. Mark also started picking fights with me over small things. He'd get irritated about household tasks, criticize my parenting decisions, and generally seem annoyed by my presence. It felt like he was looking for reasons to be angry with me. Despite all these red flags, I kept telling myself that Mark was just going through a difficult period and that things would improve once his work situation stabilized. I trusted him completely and never seriously considered that he might be cheating. 4 months ago, Mark started mentioning a coworker named Jessica who had been assigned to work more closely with his team on some major projects. He'd talk about how smart and capable she was, how much she was helping with important accounts, and how impressed his boss was with her work. Initially, I was happy that Mark had found a colleague he enjoyed working with. But as he continued talking about Jessica almost daily, I started feeling a little uncomfortable with how much he seemed to admire her. When I gently mentioned that he talked about Jessica a lot, Mark got defensive and said I was being paranoid. He said Jessica was just a colleague and that it was normal to appreciate working with competent people. Mark also started attending more work social events, claiming that networking was important for his career advancement. He'd come home late from happy hours and company dinners, often smelling like alcohol and perfume. Last month, Mark announced that he'd be taking a week-long business trip to a conference in another state. This was unusual because he'd never attended multi-day conferences before, but he said his company was investing in his professional development. During that week, Mark was barely in contact with me and the kids. He'd send brief text messages saying he was busy with sessions and networking events, but he wouldn't answer his phone when I called. When he did call, the conversations were short and he seemed distracted. When Mark came back from the conference, he seemed different. He was energized in a way I hadn't seen in months, but also secretive about his trip. When I asked about the conference sessions and what he'd learned, he gave vague answers and quickly changed the subject. Mark also started talking about potential job opportunities in other cities. He said the conference had opened up new possibilities and that he might need to consider relocating for his career. This was shocking because we'd never discussed moving and had always planned to raise our kids in our current city near both our families. 3 weeks ago, Mark started going out more in the evenings. He'd say he was meeting clients or colleagues for drinks, but these outings became increasingly frequent. He'd come home late and often seemed almost giddy, like he was having the time of his life. Around this time, I also noticed that Mark had become much more generous with gifts and compliments toward me. He'd bring home flowers unexpectedly, suggest we order expensive dinners, and tell me how much he appreciated everything I did for our family. At first, I thought maybe Mark was making an effort to improve our relationship, but the gestures felt forced and guilt-driven rather than genuine. Mark also started talking about how important honesty was in relationships and how he valued our communication. These conversations felt strange because they seemed to come out of nowhere and didn't relate to anything specific happening in our marriage. 2 weeks ago, I found a receipt in Mark's pants pocket for an expensive dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to. When I asked about it, Mark said he'd taken an important client there and that the company would reimburse him. But the receipt was for 2 people and included wine and dessert, which seemed like an unusually romantic meal for a business dinner. When I mentioned this, Mark got angry and accused me of not trusting him and looking for problems in our marriage. Last week, Mark announced another business trip, this time just for a long weekend. He said he had important meetings on Friday and Monday, so he'd be leaving Thursday evening and returning Tuesday morning. This trip felt different from his previous travel. Mark seemed nervous and excited in a way that didn't match his usual business travel demeanor. He also packed more carefully than usual and included clothes that seemed too nice for a work trip. During Mark's weekend trip, I tried calling him several times but kept getting his voicemail. When he did respond to my texts, his messages were brief and didn't answer my questions about how his meetings were going. Mark came back from his trip on Tuesday morning looking exhausted but happy. He was distracted and kept checking his phone constantly, smiling at messages he was receiving. That's when everything fell apart in the most unexpected way. Tuesday afternoon, while Mark was at work and I was home with the kids, I received a series of text messages from an unknown number. The first message said, "OMG girl, you're not going to believe what Mark said to me last night." I was confused because I didn't recognize the number and had no idea who would be texting me about Mark. I assumed it was a wrong number and was about to ignore it when more messages started coming through. The second message was a screenshot of a text conversation between Mark and someone saved in their phone as Baby Red Heart. The screenshot showed Mark saying, "I can't wait to leave her and start our life together. Being away from you this weekend was torture." My heart stopped. I stared at the screenshot, trying to process what I was seeing. The messages were definitely from Mark's phone number, and he was clearly talking about leaving me for someone else. More screenshots kept coming through. Message after message of intimate conversations between Mark and this Baby Red Heart person. They were calling each other pet names, talking about how much they missed each other, and making plans for secret meetups. One screenshot showed Mark saying, "The conference was perfect. Having you there made it feel like a real vacation. I wish we didn't have to sneak around anymore." Another showed the other person saying, "I hate that you have to go home to her every night. When are you going to tell her about us?" Mark's response was, "Soon, baby. I just need to figure out the right way to handle the kids situation. Then we can be together for real." I was in complete shock, sitting on my couch reading evidence of my husband's affair being sent to me by his affair partner, who apparently thought she was sharing this information with her best friend. More screenshots kept arriving, showing conversations from different days over the past several months. Messages about how boring I was, how Mark felt trapped in our marriage, how excited they were about their secret relationship. One particularly devastating screenshot showed Mark saying, "I should have married you instead. You understand me in ways she never could." The affair partner had responded, "We'll be together soon, and then none of this will matter. I love you so much." After about 10 minutes of receiving these screenshots, I got a text message saying, "Wait, who is this?" I thought I was texting Sarah. I realized that the affair partner had accidentally sent all these screenshots to me instead of her best friend Sarah, who apparently knew about the affair and had been receiving updates about Mark's plan to leave me. I responded, "This is Mark's wife. I think you sent these to the wrong person." There was a long pause, and then I received a message saying, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen like this." I was shaking as I scrolled back through all the screenshots, reading months' worth of evidence that my husband had been living a double life. The messages showed that Mark and this woman, whose name appeared to be Jessica, had been having an affair for at least 3 months. The screenshots revealed that Mark had been lying about everything. His work trips were actually romantic getaways with Jessica. His late nights at the office were dates with her. Even the conference he'd attended was just an excuse to spend a week with his affair partner. More devastating was seeing how Mark really felt about me and our marriage. In his messages to Jessica, he described me as boring, clingy, and someone he felt obligated to stay with because of the kids. He talked about our relationship like it was a prison he was desperate to escape. The screenshots also revealed that Mark and Jessica had been planning for him to ask for a divorce within the next month. They discussed how Mark would handle custody arrangements and how quickly he could move in with Jessica after leaving me. I spent the next hour reading and rereading every screenshot, trying to process the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Around 4 p.m., I received another text from Jessica saying, "I know you're probably shocked, but Mark and I really love each other. This wasn't supposed to hurt you." I didn't respond initially, but then curiosity got the better of me. Asked her how she had gotten my phone number. Jessica replied that she'd gotten it from Mark's phone when they were together over the weekend. She said Mark had been showing her photos of our kids, and she'd copied my number thinking it might be useful to have someday. The casualness with which she described invading my privacy and planning to potentially contact me in the future was almost as shocking as the affair itself. I didn't respond after that. I was too devastated and angry to engage with a woman who had been actively participating in the destruction of my marriage. When Mark came home that evening, I was sitting in our living room with printed copies of all the screenshots spread out on the coffee table. Mark walked in and immediately saw the papers. His face went completely white, and he stood frozen in the doorway like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched him realize that his entire secret life had been exposed in the most humiliating way possible. Finally, Mark asked, "Where did you get these?" I explained about Jessica's accidental text messages and how she'd sent me months' worth of evidence of their affair because she thought she was texting her best friend. I also mentioned that Jessica had gotten my number by copying it from his phone without his knowledge. Mark sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. He didn't try to deny anything or claim the messages were fake. He just sat there looking defeated. After a long silence, Mark said, "I never wanted you to find out like this." I told him that there was no good way for me to find out that my husband had been cheating on me and planning to abandon our family. Mark tried to explain that he'd fallen out of love with me and had connected with Jessica in a way he'd never experienced before. He said he'd been planning to ask for a divorce, but wanted to find the right time and approach. But I pointed out that according to his messages with Jessica, he'd been planning to leave me for months while continuing to lie to my face and live off the life we'd built together. Mark admitted that he'd handled everything badly, but said that he couldn't help his feelings for Jessica and that staying in our marriage would be unfair to both of us. I told Mark that he needed to pack a bag and leave immediately. I said I couldn't have him in the house while I processed what I'd learned and decided how to move forward. Mark tried to argue that we should talk through everything and consider counseling, but I said that ship had sailed when he decided to have an affair and plan his exit strategy with another woman. Mark packed a bag and left that night. I later found out he went straight to Jessica's apartment. Update: 1 week later. The past week has been absolutely devastating for me and the kids. I told my children that Daddy was staying somewhere else for a while because Mommy and Daddy were having some problems. My 5-year-old has been asking constantly when Daddy is coming home, and my 3-year-old doesn't understand why their normal routine has been disrupted. Mark has been texting and calling, alternating between apologizing and trying to justify his actions. He keeps saying that he never meant to hurt me and that he just fell in love with someone else. I've been ignoring most of his attempts to communicate, but I did respond when he asked about seeing the kids. I told him he could take them for a few hours on the weekend, but that I wasn't ready to discuss longer custody arrangements. I've also been dealing with the humiliation of knowing that Jessica and her best friend Sarah have been discussing my marriage and personal life for months. According to the screenshots, Sarah knew intimate details about my relationship with Mark and had been encouraging Jessica's affair. My sister has been staying with me to help with the kids and provide emotional support. When I showed her the screenshots, she was horrified by how calculated and long-term Mark's deception had been. I've contacted a divorce attorney who reviewed the screenshots and said they would be helpful evidence if Mark tried to claim the affair was a recent mistake rather than a months-long calculated plan to leave his family. Update: 3 weeks later. Mark and I had our first official conversation about divorce this week. Mark tried to present the situation as a mutual recognition that our marriage wasn't working, but I shut that down immediately. I made it clear that this divorce was happening because he chose to have an affair and plan his exit strategy with another woman rather than address problems in our marriage directly. Mark has been staying with Jessica full-time, which has made the reality of the situation very clear to our kids. My 5-year-old asked me why Daddy doesn't live with us anymore, and whether it's their fault. Having to explain to small children that their father chose another woman over their family has been one of the most painful experiences of my life. Mark has been pushing for 50-50 custody, but my attorney advised that his affair and abandonment of the family home would likely work in my favor for custody arrangements. I've also discovered that Mark has been telling people a very different version of events. According to mutual friends, Mark is claiming that our marriage had been over for years and that he and Jessica got together after he'd already decided to leave me. But the screenshots clearly show that the affair started while Mark was still pretending to be a committed husband and father, so I have evidence that contradicts his revisionist history. Update: 2 months later. The divorce proceedings have been emotionally draining but straightforward thanks to the evidence I have of Mark's affair and his plans to leave the family. Mark tried to argue for a more favorable asset division and wanted to minimize his child support obligations, but his affair and the calculated nature of his deception have worked against him in negotiations. My attorney used the screenshots to demonstrate that Mark had been planning his exit strategy for months while allowing me to continue investing in our marriage and family life under false pretenses. Mark and Jessica's relationship has apparently hit some rough patches now that they're living together full-time. According to friends who've seen them around town, they seem to be arguing frequently and don't appear as happy as they did during their secret affair phase. I've been going to therapy to work through the betrayal and to develop strategies for co-parenting with someone I no longer trust. My therapist has helped me understand that Mark's affair was about his own character flaws rather than anything I did wrong in our marriage. Update: 6 months later. Our divorce was finalized last month. I received primary custody of the kids, the house, and most of our shared assets. Mark has the children every other weekend and one evening per week. Mark and Jessica broke up about a month ago. Apparently, the reality of their relationship was very different from the fantasy they'd built during their affair. Mark moved into his own apartment and has been trying to restart his life as a single man. I've been doing much better emotionally and have started dating again. It's been challenging to trust new people after Mark's betrayal, but I'm gradually building confidence in my ability to recognize red flags and protect myself. The kids have adjusted better than I expected to the new custody arrangement. They still miss having their father around all the time, but they've adapted to the routine and seem more relaxed now that there isn't constant tension in the house. Final update: 1 year later. It's been a year since Jessica accidentally exposed Mark's affair by sending me those screenshots, and I can honestly say I'm grateful it happened the way it did. If Jessica hadn't made that texting mistake, I might have continued living in a marriage with someone who was actively planning to abandon me while pretending to love me. The shock of discovering everything at once was devastating, but it also gave me a complete picture of Mark's deception rather than allowing him to control the narrative. Mark has been struggling since our divorce. He's had a series of short-term relationships that haven't worked out, and he's expressed regret about throwing away our family for what turned out to be a fantasy with Jessica. But I've moved on and built a much better life for myself and my children. I'm in a healthy relationship with someone who values honesty and commitment, and my kids are thriving in our stable home environment. The experience taught me that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can ultimately lead to better outcomes if you have the courage to face the truth and rebuild your life on honest foundations. I still can't believe that Jessica was careless enough to accidentally send me evidence of her affair with my husband, but I'm grateful for her mistake. It saved me from years of continued deception and allowed me to start over with full knowledge of who Mark really was. The moral of the story: if you're going to have an affair, maybe don't trust your affair partner to handle the evidence responsibly. And if someone accidentally exposes their own betrayal by sending you screenshots, take it as the universe giving you the information you need to make better choices for your life. Also, always double-check who you're texting before sending sensitive information. Jessica's careless mistake saved me from a marriage built on lies and gave me the chance to find real happiness.